welcome to Meet the Thriller Author. I am your host, Alan Petersen, and each new podcast will feature an interview with a thriller author. You're listening to episode number 2, and in this podcast, I'll be interviewing thriller author Kevin Lee Swaim. He's the author of Come What May, Project Strike Force, and the Chimera Strain. Kevin studied creative writing at Illinois State University with the late, great David Foster Wallace, who has been called one of the most influential and innovative writers of the last 20 years by the LA Times. I had the pleasure of interviewing Kevin recently, where we talked about his books, his job as an expert in intrusion prevention systems, and about being a student of a legend like David Foster Wallace. Can you share with us what it was like having David Foster Wallace being your teacher and what that experience was like?
People have asked me before, what was it like studying with him, and what did he think of you? I don't know what he thought of me. And to be honest, I was one of a faceless horde of students that came in and out of his class. I'm sure that he had probably 1,000 students at Illinois State University who studied creative writing with him over a 10-year period. So he probably didn't remember me at all. Having said that, I used to see him at the gas station when he was buying cigarettes all the time, because the gas station right down the street from where I work was right near where he lived, and so I used to go down to get gas or get something to drink, and he's in there buying cigarettes because he just couldn't seem to quit smoking.
And what university was this again?
Illinois State University.
Oh, okay, Illinois State University. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Located in sunny Normal, Illinois.
Normal, Illinois. Is that the name of the town? Normal, Illinois?
Normal, Illinois. It's named after, it used to be teaching colleges were called normal colleges. And they named the town Normal after the teaching college. And so Illinois State University's biggest group of students are teachers. I don't know, probably 50%, maybe 70% of the teachers in Illinois go through Illinois State University.
I know it's hard to describe a writing day because it can change, but can you describe what a writing day is?
Yeah, so what really changed my life was Scrivener. So Scrivener, I'm sure you've heard of it. Scrivener, is a writing software that allows you to both write text and also organize index cards virtually within the program. I always tell people that it's like a digital audio workstation for text, whereas a digital audio workstation lets you slice and dice audio and put together a song. Scrivener lets you slice and dice text and put together a book. And so, before I used to track stuff in Word, but the nice part about Scrivener is that I can lay out scenes and structure using their virtual note cards. And then when I actually get into the writing, my writing day really usually starts after I get home from my day job. I'll sit down and I will turn on Scrivener and I will start trying to reach my minimum word count for the day. And it's as simple as that. And some days it's a chore. Other days I reach my word count without even trying. And one of the more interesting things is usually after I'm done and I go back and look, I can't tell the difference a lot of the times. Some of the stuff that I was writing that I thought would just was just trying to get words on paper to meet my word count, turned out to be brilliant. And some of the parts that just flowed and I felt like I had divine inspiration turns out to be absolute garbage. But one of the nice parts about writing is that you really don't start writing until you start rewriting. So I always tell people that writing is the initial draft, at least. Writing is like throwing clay onto a turning wheel. It's all about trying to get the clay on there. It doesn't matter what it's going to turn into or what it's going to look like at that point, right? You just want to get the clay onto the wheel and get it turning and starting to take shape. The rewriting is where you actually turn that lump of clay into a vase, right? Or or a cup or whatever you're going to make. And so the day usually, I'll get home, I'll try to crank out. In my case, I try to average 2,000 words a day when I'm actually writing.
Wow.
And so the nice part about Scrivener is it lets you track your writing by word count. So I try to crank out 2,000 words a day, and I will do that, Monday through Friday. On the weekends, I might try to get 4,000 words a day, depending on what's going on with both my regular job and personal life. I've got wife and kids, as most people do. So I will just keep chugging away until I finally reached the end. Then I'll take a break for anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks and go back and start rewriting it. And so a lot of the times I've got false starts, even though I lay out the scene structure ahead of time. A lot of the times the scene structure and the plot changes as I'm writing it. So I'll be the initial write. I will be changing scene and structure on the fly. When I'm done, there's a lot of false starts. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense. There's things that I meant to do, things that I wound up doing that I didn't mean to do. And so the next step is I try to rewrite a scene or two a day. And so I'll go back in and start cranking through the scenes, sometimes 4 or 5 scenes a day, depending on how long they are. And that's where you start adding and taking away. And at this point, I don't care so much about grammar or punctuation. I don't care about spelling. All I really care about is big scene structure. Does the characters act the way they ought to? Does the cause and effect, the causal connection between scene A and scene B and scene C, does it make sense, and does it carry through? How is the plot laid out? I look at all the big story dynamics, the kind of things the development editor would look at. And I go back and I do all the rewriting. I take out a lot of the false starts. The things that I did well, I go back and I try to emphasize. I haven't really worked on voice yet or dialogue. The dialogue a lot of times is just to get the scene from the one scene to the next scene to the next scene. And so once I'm finished with the rewrite, then I'll usually take a couple days off. Then I'll come back and I will hit it again. And this time I will actually start focusing on things like description, dialogue, tightening things up, punching things out here and there. I always like to use the description of was it Bob Ross when he used to paint, and he goes, "Well, let's just put a little tree there, right?" Just to kind of punch out the feeling of tranquility, here and there, and so the third rewrite, and each rewrite goes faster and faster, and so by the time I'm done with the third rewrite, hopefully I have the overarching plot structure laid out such that now I've made my lump of clay into a pretty bowl or a nice vase, and it's time to go the final edit, the final pass, where I basically put the final coat of paint on it and get ready to fire it up in the kiln. And so that last final gloss, and this is all before I've even given out to my beta readers. This is strictly just trying to put that last coat of paint on it, make it look pretty. Make sure this is where you go through and I'll verify a lot of the details and make sure that the character attributes stayed the same. That Bob with brown hair still has brown hair at the end of the novel as he did at the start. This is where I'll go through the description and take out some of the heavy-handed stuff. I might add in some stuff. Color for me is very hard. I'm actually colorblind. I'm not completely colorblind. I'm color deficient. I have a real problem with reds, and so I don't really see colors the way a lot of people see colors. I first noticed this when I was younger. I was going to be an electrical engineer, and I wound up not being able to go because I couldn't pass some of the basic exams for color-coded resistors and that I'd known even at an early age that I couldn't really match the colors on the clothes that I wore. I'd wear blue and purple. I thought they were the same color. One was just a little bit darker because I don't see the red in purple. And so when I go back in and I punch out color, I'll spend a lot of time going through just line by line looking for words, color words. And, do I say blue? And what did I really mean? And actually, so sometimes I'll ask my wife, hey, here's a photo, and I think that's blue. What does that look like to you? Oh, that's, Viridian blue. Viridian blue. So then I'll spend hours, Googling things like Viridian blue and what are the different shades of auburn and, what's the difference between alabaster and parchment and a lot of things like that and try to make a real conscious effort to clean up the language, tighten it up, punch it out. I tend to write, like I said, Elmore Leonard-esque, very sparse. I want the description to be as simple as possible, but still be punchy. I want it to grab the reader. I want when people are reading it that a lot of the details they can fill in with their own mind. And I always give the example that Elmore Leonard, when he wrote the Raylan Givens short story Fire in the Hole that became the TV show Justified, I think there's only 2 descriptions of Raylan Givens, one that he's tall and one that he wears a Stetson businessman's hat, not a Stetson 10-gallon hat. And that's pretty much the entire description that he gave for the main character. And then of course it became a TV show, and when he wrote a book then that kind of incorporated some of the TV show into his own book, once again, there's hardly any description. The description that he gives of characters is very small, but it's very sharp. It focuses the reader's attention, and then they use their mind to fill in the rest of the details. And I try to really avoid. And the example I give, and it's once again, it's a horrible example. God knows she sells a ton of books. Laurel K. Hamilton, who writes a vampire novel. She's a New York Times bestseller novelist. The Anita Blake Vampire Killer series. Fantastically long books. There's, I think, 20 now in the series. She sells a ton of these books, but a lot of times there'll be 4 pages of description to describe what one character is wearing. And so, and what happens is you start to notice from book to book that the character descriptions are just cut and pasted from book to book, and it really pads out the page count, but it doesn't really add anything to the character. What happens is you can describe the scene so much that the reader doesn't invest any of their own imagination in filling out the details. There's a fine line between, a television treatment of a novel where there's no details at all, and the Laurel King Hamilton treatment where you just add page after page of description, so much so that the reader doesn't really emotionally invest in the characters.
Yeah, and even like you had mentioned before with Tom Clancy, also with the info dump and explaining everything, to death, really. Did you find that to be a challenge when you're writing like Project Strike Force or the Chimera Strain to keep it more like Elmer Leonard versus going down the Tom Clancy road?
Yes, I do. I actually, when Project Strike Force was complete, it was 108 to 109,000 words, somewhere in there. And I cut it down to 90. And, and that's after actually, this was not really truly reflective of how much I cut, because I actually added a bunch of stuff in while still cutting, quite a bit out. I had pages of descriptions, technical details about firearms, about planes and automobiles and military structure that most people, really won't care about. I tried to get some of the details are actually as accurate as I could make them. There's a scene where they're in Lunstall, Germany, at Ramstein Air Force Base, and it just so happens that one of my coworkers was an MP there, stationed in like 2005 to 2006. And so the protocol that they use in case of a terrorist threat there in the book is actually based on the real protocol that they actually do, based on an interview I did with my coworker, which is basically consists of me saying, "Hey, Paul, how does this happen?" Well, and he laid out the command structure for the Air Force and who would contact who if there was a terrorist attack and you're trying to get back on the base. And so to the point that when he actually read the book later and had forgotten he'd given the detail, he said to me, "Hey, this is real." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, No. I mean, this is real. And yeah, I mean, there's fantastical elements in the book, but some of the details are real. And he said, "But this is real." I said, "Yes, you gave me the details." And, "Oh, that's right. I guess I did." I just couldn't believe it, because when I was reading it, I actually started to feel like, hey, this is, he actually knows stuff. This is really, the person you would contact, and this is how the base command structure works and how the MPs work. Yes, it actually is. And so a lot of the details in the books, I would cut out, 2 or 3 pages of description and leave in just a single paragraph. But I had done a ton of research, which, a lot of people ask, well, how can you learn this stuff? Well, you just simply do the research. There's a scene where they're trying to make a bomb, and they're using ammonium nitrate smuggled across the border from Pakistan, which is all based on, stuff that actually happened. And they've added a chemical to the ammonium nitrate to keep it from exploding. And once again, based on real stuff that happened. And I actually found this surfing the web on, believe it or not, a jihadist website where they describe how, the Americans have added this chemical, but if they just take the ammonium nitrate and they put it in, basically dig a trench, fill it with water, throw the stuff in it, and the chemical will rise to the top. And then you just create a small channel and drain the water off, and then take the ammonium nitrate out and put it in a burlap sack, stick it outside, let it sun dry, then take the ammonium nitrate, smash it up with a mortar and pestle, and you're ready to add diesel fuel and turn it back into an IED, along with a blasting cap. And so I put that in there, and it just so happens that one of my coworkers, also a former military person who had some I want to say exposure, because he actually got hit by an IED, but he had knowledge of IEDs, and he said, "Hey, now that's actually real." And I said, "Yeah, it actually is." Yes, he was actually, believe it or not, he got hit by an IED in Iraq. 3 weeks left before he was ready to come back, and he wound up spending, I think, 16 months in Walter Reed recovering from the damage. Ooh. So, yeah, he was badly hurt.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned about the research and the jihadist website. I always wonder what the FBI would get a thriller writer's computer that'd freak
Yeah,
out.
yes.
Probably.
I said it just so happens that a good friend of mine's brother is a special agent in the FBI cybercrimes unit, and I was telling him that if they ever actually did a forensic analysis of my home computer and looked at my web browsing habits, they'd wonder what is going on with this guy. Because first off, here's hit after hit where he was Googling, improvised explosives. And then there's hit after hit where he was he was doing research on, color names for, skin tone. It's a very odd, eclectic mix of Google search. And of course, then some of that you have to take with a grain of salt because, as I'm sure anybody can put anything on the internet, and that doesn't necessarily make it true. So a lot of the times, if I put anything in a book that I got from research, and it didn't come from certain what I consider my kind of pre-approved sources. A lot of the stuff about the Delta Force operators in Project Strike Force comes from Eric Haney's book about Delta Force, and also the creator of Delta Force, Charlie Beckwith. Beckwith. I want to say Beckwith. Yeah,
Beckwith.
Yeah.
Beckwith.
So I read those books, and I just found it fascinating how they created Delta Force, and the Delta Force's the creation of it and what they intended it to be, and originally they really planned on it being used for hijacking planes, right? And so a lot of their first a lot of their first, I wouldn't say research, but though they did do a ton of research, but their first mission planning was how to save hostages and retake an airplane once it's been hijacked, because of I'm sure there was a ton of aircraft hijackings in the 70s. And so, but that evolved then into the attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran, which failed. And of course, since then, who knows what they've actually done. Eric Haney, and even they kind of gave Charlie Beckwith a pass since he created Delta Force. Eric Haney was apparently ostracized after his book, especially after his book got turned into the television series The Unit. I think it was David Mamet who made the television show The Unit, all based on Eric Haney's book. Surprisingly, the consistency though, and that's the thing. So you're trying to figure out how much of this is real, and to be honest, you have no idea how much of it's real, right? Because they're very tight-lipped, unlike the SEALs who seem to just give up. Yeah, apparently the SEAls that it's just like carte blanche to just tell every secret whereas the Delta Force, there's so little details given out except for basically three people: Eric Haney, Charlie Beckwith, and the guy who wrote a book called first I think it was called Kill Bin Laden or Get Bin Laden, and then he wrote a book called, I think it's The Black Site. Dalton Fury was his code name that he created to write these books. But there's really only been three people who've come out of Delta Force who've written anything or given out any kind of real details. And all three of them have been, Beckwith, they kind of gave a pass, but the other two guys were pretty much ostracized from the Special Forces community and from Delta Force. And according to Eric Haney, they're, persona non grata at any of the Delta Force, reunions or functions, probably as it should be. And so when I'm writing my books, there's a science fiction element to it. And then on the Delta Force side, I try to put as much as I can kind of confirm or cross-confirm across multiple books. But really, so much of that is so secret. The operational secrets are it's so ingrained in the Special Forces community that you don't really know how much of that is real. And while I've got friends who've served in Special Forces, I've never had a friend serve in Delta Force. I do have a friend's little brother actually went through the selection process for Delta Force, and apparently that part is still pretty much like it's described in Eric Haney's book, which is that they take you out into a wilderness or into a desert or wherever, and they give you a map and they say, okay, go from here to here, and they don't tell you how much time you have, and you've got to take off through the wilderness or through the desert, and once you get to the next checkpoint, they tell you, okay, now go here, and they just keep this up until you either drop or until you give up. And the point is they want to see how far they can push you. and how you respond to stress, to lack of sleep, to lack of food, to lack of water. They don't tell you how much time you have. They're giving it, you're basically giving you the opportunity to, wash yourself out of the selection process. And apparently he did wash out. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. And I believe he was a ranger when he did it. And he said it was, he really didn't know how he was doing as he was going through the selection process. But by the time he was done, he said that, he was so ready to give up that he said, I don't have it in me to do what they do.
Yeah, and going through ranger training is no walk in the park either.
Yeah.
He did that successfully.
Yeah. Surprisingly, I've got another friend who's actually a former ranger, and a friend who's been an airborne. And I run, they're actually just my beta readers on a lot of stuff, and they correct a lot of mistakes, a lot of dumb mistakes on my part that obviously I would know if I'd served in the military. A lot of my family has served in the military. I have not, and so I go off what they say. I run it through them for feedback. But like, for instance, the Chimera strain, I've got a scene where the SEAL Team 6, which is, they're not really SEAL team, they're not really SEALs, they're DevGru. The special was a Special Operations Development Group. They're the ones, who went in on the Bin Laden raid. I have a scene where they're in a submarine in an underwater hangar, and they're going to use a SEAL delivery unit to attack a ship. And it just so happens that my friend's son is in the Navy, and he actually works with a former SEAL, and he asked him some details, and the answer came back with, well, you can kind of make up what you want, because there's so few people who actually know that, and they're not going to speak. So how some of that stuff works, you're free to kind of use your imagination. Some of it you can find through the Department of Defense's own websites. But a lot of it and the actual operations is so top secret and so classified. And there's so few people who are trained to do some of that underwater. A lot of the SEALs go through they go through BUDS training where they learn underwater demolition. But the use of the SEAL delivery vehicles, underwater to attack another submarine or a ship, there's so few of them that actually do it. While there may be 3,000 active SEALs, there's a very small subgroup of the DevGru guys who actually do that kind of work. That who's gonna call you out on it? And he's like, it's so rarefied and it's so highly skilled that the people who actually do know, they really not only will they not say, they can't say.
So now that you're writing and publishing, do you still find time to read? Are you still reading as much as you used to read?
I still try to make time to read every day. I try to read something. I still try to read several books a week, sometimes a dozen books a week. Sometimes, depending on my workload with everything else and with wife and kids, it gets down to just a couple books a week. But lately I've been a big fan of I believe it's Craig Johnson that writes the Walt Longmire books. Those are actually very good books. They got turned.
Yeah, those thrillers.
They are murder mysteries, and they're set in Absaroka County, nice. Wyoming, and they got turned into a TV show on A&E called Longmire. And in a very odd coincidence, I saw the first book on the bookshelf walking through the bookstore, and I started reading it, and I thought, this is an interesting book. And I had no idea that it was getting ready to air as a television show. And I bought it, and I decided, I think I'm going to buy the second one, right? That was a really good book. And so I go to buy the second one, and suddenly it's got a cover that, talks about this, television show. And I'm like, a television show? Apparently I wasn't a big fan of A&E because I'd never heard of it. But I went ahead and read I'm current on the books in that series. Fantastic books. I also read, everything from George R.R. Martin all the way through to trying to think of a good example of kind of an odd book that I've read lately. But actually, there's a fantastic book out there, and I can't remember the author, but it's called Ready Player One, and it's a fantastic novel that combines a lot of 70s and 80s culture. It's set, I think, in the year 2020 or 2025, and the main character references a lot of stuff that happened in the 70s and 80s from television shows and movies, a lot of Atari video games, which that was about the time I grew up. So I found that just a fantastic story. I knew exactly what he was talking about when he mentioned everything from the Atari games. All the ones that he specifically mentions are ones I specifically played as a kid, all the way up through to having to requote all the dialogue from Big Trouble in Little China, which as a kid I went and saw and thought was just a fantastic movie.
Yeah, we must be the same age because that was the same thing
Yes,
for me.
I'm actually quite concerned that they're remaking that with The Rock.
Are they? I didn't know
they
that.
just announced it, I think, last week. So please don't destroy my childhood the way George Lucas did by making Greedo shoot first.
Yeah.
So
Now, do you find movies and pop culture influence your writing or in your novels at all?
more than I'd like. Because I read so much when I was younger, when I'm writing, so much of that comes from the stuff I've read. But what I find myself falling into is that I use pop culture, television, and movie references, as shorthand. And so when I wrote Project Strike Force, I like to tell my friends, right, that I'm writing Star Wars, right, and the next book is going to be The Empire Strikes Back, and I'll sum it all up in the third one, out of a projected 9, and it'll be the Return of the Jedi, right, and of course, that doesn't take into account the new, movies 1, 2, and 3. But once again, as a certain age, the Star Wars as Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. People like my daughter know Star Wars as The Phantom Menace. I can't even think of that names.
That's not right.
It's Jar Jar Binks and everything, and I don't really understand a lot of it, and I found it horrible. But once again, destroying raping the memory of my childhood. But yeah, I use a lot of pop culture, a lot of movie and television references. Like I said, sometimes more than I'd like. I try to filter some of that out. But the nice part about writing things like Come What May and Hard Times is that while the character is quite a bit younger than myself, he has some culture and pop references to draw from. And so his pop culture and references are age appropriate to him, right? Not age appropriate to me. So he refers to like that ancient movie with the little girl and the television and telling people they're here, because for him that probably would have been an ancient movie, whereas for me I saw it as a kid once again.
Yeah, which they're also
remaking. So yes, once again, apparently they've run out of stories, and instead of purchasing indie author stories, they've decided they'll just keep recycling trying to get every last cent they can squeeze out of their existing intellectual property.
Yeah, why start over? Let's just remake it.
So
now where can readers find you? What's your website and your Facebook? Are you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. I think it's at Kevin Lee Swaim. I'm on Facebook at Kevin Lee Swaim. My blog, I don't really point people to my blog. A lot of my blog is just me rambling about stuff that probably people don't care about. I do it more for some of my friends. And having said that, I actually have had authors contact me who've found me through my blog of all things. And I received a fantastic email from a guy. He's the chief firefighter in Modesto, California, and he wanted to thank me and tell me how much he loved reading my book. And he just thought that Project Strike Force was one of the greatest novels he'd ever read. It was so fast paced; it was like watching a movie in his head. And he just loves thrillers and books on doomsday prepping.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, so there's a little doomsday prepping in your book.
I have no idea where that came from. I'm doomsday prepping, and I mean, well, I'm glad he expressed the sentiment, right? I just couldn't understand where the doomsday prepping came in, and I actually went out to Amazon, and sure enough, some of the also boughts are books about doomsday prepping. And so I don't understand the connection there, but I don't know. If I had to guess, I was probably when I had a free giveaway at the same time that somebody was, had a big giveaway or sale on books by doomsday prepping, and the search engine optimization at Amazon linked them together. But I'm not sure actually if that's it though. Sometimes I get emails from fans, from all over the world who Canada, England, Australia, and surprisingly I get these emails from people, and they talk about how much they love my books, and then they'll reference other books that they read. I'm like, how did they ever make the connection from those books to my book? And I have no idea how it happens. I'm not as hip on the internet marketing as I should be, especially considering I have like a tech, kind of job. But
Well, that's cool though. You get readers are reading their own getting their own things out of your books, which is pretty cool.
it means a lot to me when somebody sends me an email saying that they read my book and they really liked it. It actually does really, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but it actually makes my day because obviously I'm not writing for fame and fortune. I mean, I wouldn't turn it down if it came. As as my old man used to tell me, I've tried rich and I've tried poor, and I like rich a whole lot better. But having said that, what really motivates me to write is to make somebody feel the way I felt when I read a good book. And so when somebody sends me an email and tells me how much they like the book and how I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was just like watching a movie. I just fell into it. This goes back to when I had class with Dave Wallace, who was reading one of my short stories, and he said, how I know that this was a good story? He's like, forget all the fancy lit crit, and I know this is a good story because when I was reading it, I forgot I was sitting in the chair. Wow. And you need to do more of this, right? You need to make me forget that I'm sitting in a chair reading, a short story by a student, from Central Illinois. He's like, if you can make me feel like I fell into the story and I lost sense of time, and when I'm done, I feel like I've run a marathon. That's what you need to shoot for, and I think you can do it.
Great advice too. For if anyone's listening that's thinking about writing or trying to get into writing, is there anything else you want our listeners to know about you or your books?
Well, I like you said, if you get into writing because you think you're going to write the next great American novel, or you think that you're going to make $1 million, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Every sale to me is like a surprise. I'm glad that somebody bought the book. I'm glad that people are entertained, because that's, in the literary community, there's a big, almost negative connotation to be entertaining, right? People want yes. Writing to have meaning. They want it to be complex and to speak about issues. And, I always thought that can't it kind of be both? I loved as a young man, I loved Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And I thought that it was fantastic how literary it was, while at the same time being wildly entertaining. And you didn't need to understand a lot of literary critique or literary analysis to enjoy reading Catch-22. And I thought that there was needed to be more of that in the literary community, right? And the literary community hates that. They don't enjoy reading for enjoyment's sake. And then there's some interesting, literary theories out there about should novels be entertaining? Should you have to work, right? What is serious literature versus what is escapist, fantasy, right? My stuff is escapist fantasy. Having said that, I tried to write my plot such that Project Strike Force, in a lot of ways, is some of the more interesting aspects of Oedipus Rex, where by trying to keep an action from happening, he causes the very action to happen. And I laid out some of the plot in Project Strike Force based upon that. That's a very literary kind of, tool to try to try to slice and dice the plot up and move it around and do something that I would call literary, right? But at the same time, I wanted to be entertaining, and so each book seems to be getting better and better. I guess I've kind of found my voice, and so all I can tell people is that you really just have to sit down and do the work, and there's no shortcuts. Chances are you're not going to sit down and write the great novel or a fantastic, thrilling read your first time out. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? You shouldn't give up. Everything that's worth having takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah, but that's great advice. And when's your next book coming out? Or are you still
I believe
on
Hard
it?
Times will be out hopefully by, if not the 1st of July, by the end of July or the beginning of August. So it's complete. I was actually working on it this morning. I'm going to send it off to my editor here pretty soon. That would be the other piece of advice, is that if you can afford an editor, if you can scrimp and save your pennies or your bottle caps, get an editor. Stephen King. I love Stephen King. A lot of people, in the literary community think he's a hack, right? A lot of people on just regular readers think that he's amazing. I tend to think that he's amazing, and sometimes a hack. But having said that, even Stephen King needs an editor. And if you ever get the chance to read his book on writing, where he shows you examples of short stories and how he edited them, you'll find out that his rough drafts aren't necessarily any better than yours. And so it's the editing and the rewriting and the final shaping is really what makes a novel polished and what makes it both entertaining, and sometimes it lets you layer in the meaning so that hopefully your readers take away not just that they had a good story, but that gives them something to think about.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Kevin. I really appreciate it. That's some great advice, and it was fascinating to talk to you about the books and thrillers and the whole 9 yards.
I appreciate it. I had a good time.
Okay,
all right. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. You can visit our site at get.thrillingreads.com/podcast for more information on our podcasts. And you can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcatcher, like iTunes, the most popular one, of course. Just search for Meet the Thriller Author and you'll find me there. And I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Meet Thriller Author. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your comments and your feedbacks on the shows. And I'll have a new podcast, new interview with a thriller author. I'll be posting them every Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. And don't forget to subscribe. And please visit my author website at alanpetersen.com.